welcome to the show, everyone.
Hey, guys.
So glad you're here. Wow, overwhelm. I think that's important.
I think that this is probably one of the most relatable podcast episodes, this topic, at least podcast topics. A lot of people struggle with feeling overwhelmed, or maybe don't struggle with it, but they've experienced it at some point in their life, right? So we're talking about overwhelm, information overload, and honestly, how you can strengthen your marriage during these times, because how you respond to overload will either weaken or strengthen your marriage.
And there's this interesting thing that sometimes maybe one of you in the marriage relationship talks more about their overwhelm than others. How
usually
we can
it's the wife.
Support each other, how we can help each other. Why would you say it's usually the wife?
Well, I think that women we're more verbal in general. That's a given. Everybody knows that. But I do think that there is an aspect of getting it off your chest that maybe we believe this lie that if we talk about it, it's going to be better. There's that concept of venting, right? But we're going to talk about how if you're complaining or constantly talking about something, it doesn't actually change if it's going to get fixed or not, right?
And I can see, from experience, I know sometimes things I might be overwhelmed by or concerned by, I won't share because I feel like that is a burden I don't want to put on my wife.
I know that you've shared in like our Courageous Marriage series and in some of the lives that we do in our Be Courageous app, you've taught men to be wise about when they bring certain things up to their wives, like being aware of like what is the season that you're in as a married couple, or that she's in with childbearing or postpartum, different things. That's just examples, right? As far as like what you're working on together, what potential burdens you're working on together.
And I would say I always tell you everything. I don't always tell you about every time I'm overwhelmed, but I always tell you everything, but I make sure I do it in a good time.
Like good timing.
Yes.
And just kind of feeling out when to talk about things. And I would say I do the same thing, right? Like you can tell when your spouse, regardless of if you're a husband or wife, is really overwhelmed. And then there's those times where maybe you're not being aware. And so I think that just pausing and before you speak, think before you speak, which is actually a biblical concept, right? But to take a moment and evaluate, is this going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, if you have a spouse who has already express to you their overwhelm, right? Yeah. And not just putting one more thing on them in that moment, but really being thoughtful and considerate and thinking of them more highly than yourself, right? And not necessarily like just saying it because you need to say it, but being wise with when you bring it to them.
But we're going to talk about all kinds of things. Information overload, how to manage that, devices, all the things and so forth. But first, we have something pretty exciting. We are doing a live once a month for the entire Courageous Parenting Program community inside the group in the app, only for those people. And it's great because when someone invests in the program, they get the full program immediate access now too, to the dashboard and all that's there. But they also get to participate as long as they want to in the app for these lives. And this next one is on
consequences, spanking, and more. So we're actually diving into all of it.
Yeah, for about 30 minutes and then open Q&A for about 30 minutes. Of course, we go longer if people want us to. But super excited about that. CourageousParenting.com. Learn all about the program, be part of the community, be part of the lives, and get the full curriculum, which is amazing.
Yeah. So, and in there, in the fourth session, which is an hour-long teaching, biblical teaching on biblical discipline. You also get the 10 steps to biblical discipline in a PDF download that you can then print off, laminate, put on the side of your fridge. I have mine on the side of my fridge because it's super helpful for me to just remember like, oh, I need to check my heart as I'm stepping into this time of needing to correct a kid. And so that's just step one.
It's so important to know how to pursue your child's heart and implement biblical discipline, which they go together. They really need to, and they're supposed to. So, by the way, that next live is March 20th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, but all the replays are saved, put in a library and all that, so for forever. So, all right, let's dive into it, Ange.
All right, so, today I just want to start out by saying, when we're dealing with overwhelm or anxiety, it's good for us to recognize that we're not the only ones in a marriage. And so, obviously from a perspective of being the wife in a marriage for 25 years, I know that there are times where Isaac might be experiencing some overwhelm with some things, but maybe I don't necessarily know because we haven't had a time alone away from the kids for a little while to be able to talk about those things. Maybe it's conversation topics that we don't want the kids to hear at that time, depending on their age or whatever. And if this is sounding familiar to you, this is a scenario that you're experiencing or that you've experienced, I have an encouragement for you wives. And one is recognizing that a lot of times women express themselves, and it's easy in today's society. I'll just say it. I think that a lot of podcasts are actually presented for women. And we're very self-reflective and constantly evaluating things and how can we improve things. And there's a lot out there for visioneering and growing and changing and taking on new projects. And there's a lot of women who, even at Valentine's Day, I saw a lot of Insta stories that were like, don't give me a ring, give me a 50-acre homestead, you know? And so there's this whole like movement of people wanting to take on even some harder lifestyle choices, right? Which, I'll be honest, that could be overwhelming for a husband. And so recognizing that if you have overwhelm in your life and you're expressing it, but you're not giving room for your spouse to express the things that they maybe are troubled by, want to pursue, desires or dreams that they've had, that they feel like they're never going to be able to because they're constantly trying to fix your overwhelm, that's not really how a biblical marriage should be growing. That's not like, it's not a path it should be growing on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's okay to vent and to talk about things. Of course, the marriage is that's what we're here for each other for. But I think what you're saying is make sure you're there for the husband also.
Yeah, that it's not all about you, right? It's not all about your perspective and what you're seeing in your kids and what you're seeing in life and all of the things. And I think that
I'll be honest with you. Like if I feel like your cup is full, like you're overwhelmed and you're maxed, I'm not going to share anything.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And we've talked about that. Yeah. And so I think that that's a conversation that a lot of listeners could benefit from is like, if you are constantly expressing your overwhelm, and I think that each individual within a marriage is responsible for taking their thoughts captive and really discerning. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the importance of self-discipline and not getting overwhelmed on a personal level, right? But when you think about your marriage and the oneness in your marriage, there's a need for us as wives and husbands as well to recognize you're not the only one in marriage. Yeah. And so a lot of times I feel like I know that it's not just reflective of our marriage, but there are many times where you're such a good listener and you'll ask me how I'm doing on a date night, for example, and then I'll start sharing some things. But then we have had date nights where at the end I ask myself, wait, did he even share what he was necessarily overwhelmed with? And just like realizing that we as women need to be asking the same question of our spouse, even more so because when you recognize like even gender roles within marriage, we were just studying biblical womanhood at church and in the Heart of the Home Bible study in the Be Courageous app, which I lead every Friday or actually it's now on Saturdays at 10 a.m. We do a 1-hour Bible study, us ladies in the Courageous Mom group. And one of the topics was on biblical womanhood. And we were reading through Genesis where it says that God saw that it was not good for man to be alone. So he created a helper suitable for him. And that Eve, woman, was that helper that was suitable. But a lot of times in marriages, I think that there's just selfishness both in men and women, just in general. That's humanity, right? That's our human nature right there. But what you see portrayed is honey-do lists and women wanting their husbands to be their helper with their projects. And they're the ones that are actually leading and like, let's go this way. Let's do this agenda, right? And I think that the information overload of today can actually be stirring those paths that women want to go on, whether it's, oh, we're going to have a homestead and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And asking yourself, okay, but is this something my husband actually really wants to, or am I the one that's driving it?
Well, and we need to live, husbands, we need to live with our wives in an understanding way, Scripture says, and we need to lead, we need to protect. And yes, leadership is servant leadership, but it's also leading. It's also leading the way. Right. It's not meekness. It's not weakness. It's encouragement, vision, thinking through things, but it's not going your own way either. It's working together, facilitating discussion to decide together. And sometimes you're initiating, right? Often you're initiating and moving things in a direction after discussion. And I think that's beautiful. But yeah, if you're just like, if the wife's just like, we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to do that.
And then the guy's just like, oh yeah, we're doing this.
And the guy's just catching up and then trying to watch the finances and the challenge of that and the pressures of those things. Right. Yeah, that could create some challenge. So I think being a team
is what's important.
Is what's important in living in those gender roles.
You know, it's interesting because just while you were talking, I was even thinking about how a lot of marriages don't reflect that that sensibility of being able to communicate with one another and warn each other and saying, hey, do you think you can actually handle that though? Because I know that we both are idea people. You're a visionary. I kind of am too. So we both will have a lot of ideas for things that we want to do, right? Like I'll have ideas for the homestead. You'll have different ideas and we come together and we like building together. And so that's something that we've actually been really good at over the years. But a lot of couples, that's not necessarily true for them, right? Where there's maybe one person that's stronger in being a visionary and that sort of thing. And even if it's the wife, that's okay. As far as being the idea person.
Sure.
But here's the deal. So many marriages, one or two people are both struggling with overwhelm. And so there is a need for the person that maybe isn't that idea person to have permission to hold the idea person accountable and say, hold on a second though, because remember last year we did da-da-da-da-da and that overwhelmed you. We need to just pause and go, can we actually handle this or is this going to overwhelm us?
Yeah, it's super important to think about. Yeah. So this goes into our first point, which we're kind of already talking about, which is awareness of self and your spouse and evaluating how much, you can handle in different areas and what you can do, how each other are wired, and really having this self, is there self-discipline that exists? And that goes into kind of, this topic of technology and other things, which we'll talk about in a second, but are we overwhelmed because we're not self-disciplined? That's an interesting concept.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that more in a few more minutes. But as far as the awareness of self and evaluating, really what we're talking about is just having a time of evaluating. If you're struggling with overwhelm or which you need to figure out why you're overwhelmed. Maybe you have too many things on your plate, or maybe it's that you are experiencing information overload. It could be one or the other, or it could be both, actually. And to sit down as a couple, I think that there's a lot of wisdom in sitting down as a couple to do the self-evaluation process or whatever you want to call it, and to say, okay, obviously I've been overwhelmed in my spirit, or I've been overwhelmed in my mind. My time, I feel overwhelmed by not having enough time, right? There's a lot of things that you could potentially label it as, but identifying what exactly is the issue and then talking it out together, there is actually insight when you're communicating together. I know there have been many times where we've sat down just to evaluate our lifestyle or whatever it is, and we have to make choices.
Yeah.
We have to choose what things we're going to say no to. And sometimes that's harder for me than it is for you. And so I find that it's very life-giving and freeing for me when you and I sit down together and we look at all the things we're doing and you go, well, let's just not do this and this. And I'm like, okay, well, he's leading and that makes sense. And it's I don't have to make the decision. And it's actually really... It takes a huge heaviness and a burden off of me. And I think that if couples were to sit down together and to acknowledge, hey, there's an overload, or there's an information overload, there's too many things in my mind that I've been exposed to, and to confess that one to another, and then to create some healthy boundaries and maybe some accountability within the marriage can be really powerful.
And this can happen. I was just thinking too, pressures on one of you about doing something or about how to do something. And then it's it can become a burden. It can become overwhelm. I even think it's probably okay for us to talk about, but we were recently talking about how we're going to help do children's ministry, right? And how to help. And we're talking about VBS. I thought this was an interesting topic.
And for our church,
it was kind of, there was some overwhelm. And then there was some pushing on each other in communication in a
very good way,
mature, respectful way, but talking and working through it, because I've come to the conclusion that I don't want children to be without their parents and dropped off at church things. I'm increasingly not believing in that. And that's another topic. But then how do you do VBS when that's how it's always done?
Exactly.
And then I was like, okay, but now
he was just pushing back on the concept of VBS. Anyway, so
there was some overwhelm, and then we had some good discussion about it. But then it ended up being this wonderful thing of like finding a new path, that I've honestly never seen before. But that's very exciting, and it's fun to create new things. We love to create new things. But, I think that there are so many examples in life where you as a couple could potentially come across a specific issue, or like even something you're doing as a family. Like you even brought up making bread, right? Like I've been making bread for many years off and on, but the last 3 years I've been doing it on a more regular basis, at least weekly, right? And there are many times where it's every day. Yeah.
Right. But then when you're online and you're getting more and more information, then you can start to go, oh, wait, but now my ingredients, those are also not necessarily the best way to get the ingredients. So now I'm going to have extra steps in the process, or, and I know that you guys know what I mean when it comes to like milling your own wheat. And I used to do that like 15 years ago. We would buy our own red wheat berries and our own white wheat berries, and we would mill them, and then we'd make our bread. And there is actually a big tasting difference. There really is, having that endosperm versus just buying flour that's already been ground, right? But there's an extra element, an extra step that is somewhat, it's not massively time consuming, but when you're counting your minutes because you want to use your time wisely, it is an extra thing. It just is, right? And so then if you are feeling like, oh, well, what's the point in making bread if it's not really any different than what I buy at the store, then you can just justify back into that, right? And you guys who are listening, maybe some of you relate to this concept of information overload, or like even feeling like certain lifestyle choices that you have chosen that are good and they're healthy. It's like you come to a crossroad where you go, okay, but what's more important? Really?
You can't,
right?
It's hard to do it all.
You can't do everything perfectly, but at the same time, to start going, okay, well, yeah, but making bread, I'm still using 3 or 4 ingredients. You know what I mean? That's way better than the 16 that is on the back of the label of what's at the store. But at the same time, like you still have this feeling, if you start to feel like you're less than, or you're not measuring up because you're not grinding your own wheat. Okay, you could grind your own wheat. Where are you getting your wheat from? Are you growing your own wheat? Like every step, there's going to be some way to do it
Angie,
even better.
But you're growing your own wheat, but is it in uncontaminated soil? Yeah, it's good soil.
But what about cloud seeding?
What about the stuff falling from the sky that lands in the... Wait, it's not perfect!
No, in all seriousness, like everything that we pursue to do in this life, there is potentially a better way to do it. Yeah. And so if you allow those things and that information to become a burden that makes you feel like you're less than, then you are going to experience overwhelm in your life. And the word sets us free.
Praise the Lord, what Jesus did on the cross, because now we don't have to be perfect, because we can't be.
We absolutely can't be.
And now we're right with God, right? That's the gospel. But at the same time, are we pursuing perfection in our life when it's completely unattainable?
Right. And if we are pursuing perfection in an area, or we think that we are, for a moment, I'm just going to go there to the prideful one, because we all struggle with pride at times, right? And it's like, if you think that being a biblical woman or a biblical homemaker or a biblical parent looks like X, Y, and Z, and you have your list of things, and then you start to be like, yeah, I got it. And I only want to be friends with people who are like me. That's pretty arrogant. And God, because he loves us and he loves all of us, he will discipline us and allow us to experience some sharp pains, some little thorns in our side, if you will, to help bring us back to a humble heart posture and recognizing that we can't attain perfection.
That does tend to happen wherever we're trying to pursue
Something better.
Yeah. Excellence. Pursue excellence.
Which is
we
good.
develop a conviction in that, which is all good.
Uh-huh.
But then when it turns bad is when other people don't pursue excellence in that same area of bread making, let's say. We can become judgmental.
Right.
Whoa, you buy bread in the store?
or you don't stretch your bread 4 times a day? I don't know.
So, but then there's other areas where the other person's pursuing excellence and they might be doing the same thing. And so it's really divisive, actually.
Yeah.
Pride is so ugly and we all struggle with it. I just preached on this on last Sunday. It is so ugly. I raised my hand up. Anybody prideful, I raised my hand up because I struggle with it.
Yep.
And everybody did. But it's like, yeah, we need to be tempered and God is tempering us. But let's proactively temper ourselves. And I think that the pursuit of excellence is good, but it also can be overwhelming. And so we have to pick. We can't pursue excellence in every little thing because with the amount of information we have access to now, which I think is a good thing, actually, that we can get access to good information and find good information instantly. I actually like that. But I also understand it can be overwhelming because now you know that, peanuts aren't good for you. Oh, let's get rid of peanut butter. Oh, wait. Some people are like, what? Yeah, they're man-made. They weren't naturally made. What?
So are they actually good for your body?
So, I could go on any kind of food. We could go on any kind of thing you buy. You could go on just about anything.
Or even soil. I mean, I remember a few years ago, we were making compost for the homestead and for the garden. And we had quite a bit. And we almost had enough to refill our garden boxes and all that kind of stuff. And but then I was like, you know what? I actually need more. I need more dirt. And that next pile over there isn't quite ready yet. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll just make my own. I'll get compost and I'll get my perlite and my sphagnum peat moss. I'm getting all my ingredients, right? But then I'm like, wait a second. What were the cows eating that made that steer compost? And was there glyphosate on that field and what they ate? And then it's like, oh, it's contaminating my garden because I'm adding soil that was bought at the store to my garden.
Yeah.
Even though anyways. So you can literally, my whole point in this is
you can think yourself to death.
You could literally think yourself into the grave regarding it never being perfect. And we can do the best that we can do, but are we going to allow the pursuit of excellence to steal our joy?
There you go.
And so that really is where overwhelm wins people over. And so we have some encouragement for you guys. When it comes to the evaluating process, this is really where you as a couple need to be honest about the reality of where your brains are at. And what is it that you're truly trying to pursue? And are you exhausting yourself physically, running a hamster wheel, trying to pursue excellence, which pursuing excellence is a good thing. We pursue excellence in everything that we do. But at the same time, we try to balance that out with, is this actually eternal?
Is it worth it? What are the costs?
Yes, exactly, because there's cost to everything, right? Like when you're gardening, for example,
some
there is a
are.
physical cost, a time cost.
Some things are worth it, and some things aren't. And sometimes we're doing things in excellence that aren't worth it because the cost is relationships, or the cost is time to be able to go do things.
So on the information, let's talk about information for a minute, because obviously you're going to evaluate your relationship. Where is each person at? Overload wise and dream wise and all that. And then you're going to talk about how you're wired, because some people tend to become more anxious or overwhelmed easier than others, right? I know that for myself, even just it's not information, but entertainment wise, I know how I'm wired is so different from Isaac, to where I discipline myself based upon that self-awareness of, oh, I can't handle watching war films or whatever it is, because it will literally, I will put myself into that movie and I'll be thinking about it and I won't sleep as well.
But she doesn't put that same expectation on me because I am wired differently and I can handle some of those things. So me and some of the
my sons,
older boys will watch things that mom won't watch.
Hey guys, I want to share with you about a program we've been loving at the Tolpin household. Studies by University of Arkansas, Ohio State, and American Psychological Association and more show that preteens who participate in art show increased brain activity in areas responsible for focus, planning, and critical thinking. That's why we're partnering with Creating a Masterpiece. They offer award-winning online art programs for ages 4 to 104. Get on-demand access to drawing programs, art lessons, art history, watercolors, charcoal, sketches, and so much more. And all at one low rate for your entire household. Just a lesson or two a week can nourish your child's brain in a really powerful way. So visit creatingamasterpiece.com to sign up today. That's creatingamasterpiece.com because anyone can create a masterpiece. Hey guys, I just want to take a moment from the podcast to share with you something that we have been really enjoying in our homeschooling, and that's VotebergMusicAcademy.com. Our son Solomon has been taking guitar lessons, but they actually offer 4 different instruments private lessons through VotebergMusicAcademy.com. There's piano, ukulele, fiddle, and guitar. So if this is something that one of your kids would enjoy, or if your entire family is into doing music together, when you sign up and get a membership, your entire family can use this as an opportunity to be learning music together, which is exciting. At the end of this month, the prices will be increasing at VMA. And so if you join with my code COURAGEOUS today, you can lock your lessons in for less than $30 a month. And you can choose from one of those courses to learn by. It's by ear, song-based music, which is exciting because kids actually they learn something right away, which makes it so fun for them to keep trying. So if you use my code COURAGEOUS, you get 20% off every month and you lock in that rate. And you can learn music in a way that sticks for a lifetime and enjoy that together as a family. Right. And so there's this element of like when you're evaluating, not expecting each other to be like the other person. And that takes humility. Mm-hmm. And not thinking that you're better because of how you're wired, but recognizing there's a difference. And then there's this like really powerful evaluation, which is how much of God's word am I listening to versus man's word, which is oftentimes the problem when it comes to information overload.
Well, I think we got a few more tips. We're going to run through them quicker, but I think the next one is talking about technology. This is a big one. This is super important. Yeah. Technology can be a disruption to social relationships. It can be antisocial. It can be distracting. It can give cues to people that you don't care what they're saying. Can disrupt family time, looking at our phones, things like that. And there can be a lot of challenges. It can be addictive. People get addicted to, it's like this FOMO that can set into people. It's like fear of missing out on what's happening, always feeling like you need to know what's happening and checking things and things like that. And so
needing to be in the know
like, about what's going on and things like that. Yeah. And then the other side of it is technology is a resource. It's a tool. I personally love technology. Why? Because it leads to great efficiencies and a great ability. Right now, we're using technology, and this podcast is likely to be listened to in over 190 countries around the world. And we're about to share scripture. We're going to share biblical truth. And that to me is like amazing, right? And we're able to use our phones. We're able to use social media on purpose to share the gospel, to share good seeds and share information around the world to impact legacies. And our goal is 10 million legacies, right? And so technology can be very good.
But I will say that you and I together have felt like we were called to that mission field.
Right.
And that's different than some people who maybe are not called to that mission field. So we would never like look down on or expect someone else to have the same mission field that we have. But in the same right, other people shouldn't expect us to have the same perspective on technology that maybe they have, right? And so recognizing that it is a neutral thing that can be used for good or evil. Yeah. And it's our responsibility to use it for good if we're going to use it. And that's what we try to do. But at the same time, even you and I, we have some strong boundaries. We have some self-discipline in regards to what we use and what we don't use. Yeah. And where we are and where we aren't as far as technology goes. So the first scripture that we want to share with you guys is in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. It says, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive." Take every thought captive to obey Christ. And then listen to the second part of this verse. It says, being ready to punish every disobedience. This is us literally punishing ourselves, like being ready to punish every disobedience we have. So does technology actually cause you to be disobedient in what God has called you to do in your parenting with your kids? I think that would be an appropriate self-evaluation question to ask yourselves on a date night. Yeah. Does social media, does technology, does movies, does TV, does YouTube, does do these things actually prevent us from being obedient to what God has called us to do as parents?
So husband saying to your wife, hey, is there anything about my technology use that is negative, that is hurting the family, is a counter to good family life?
Because that would be destroying, like if we were to figure out something and go, okay, we're not going to allow that to happen anymore. That is destroying the arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. Because if it's causing a rift in what we know the knowledge of God has told us to do, we're just using parenting as an example, it could be anything, then we're ready to be disciplined in that way, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete.
So we should hold each other accountable to good technology use. We should hold our children accountable to good technology use. And I personally believe that while they're in my home, at the right age, I want them to gradually use technology. For example, our older kids, now much older, not the middles and not the lowers, have smartphones. We have taken the position that that's a tool that is important for many aspects of work later on in the future. And we don't know what they're going to do, but while they're in our home, we want them to become disciplined with that tool, with accountability, so when they launch, they're equipped. And I think in these days, it's an important thing. Now, we can disagree on that point. And people can parent in a different way on that. We're not saying everybody needs to do it that way, but you do have to think about, what is the world we're launching our kids into? And are they going to be equipped to use tools? Even I'm very negative about AI, by the way. Very negative. But the negative parts I have are about plagiarism, about, cheating, and also about the craft of writing disappearing in people's abilities. And then people mostly reading from robots in the future.
And not actually communicating human to human.
So that's the negative side. But AI is here to stay. It's growing exponentially, if you know what that means, right? And so what's important then is that I equip my children in how to use AI. Never to use it to write something and put your name on it. But to use it for efficiency, how to use it to gain wisdom and gain knowledge about things quicker and more efficiently. And it can be a tool. So as Christians, I think we have to be careful not to go, whoa, all crypto's bad, for example. No. Okay, well, one world currency is going to be on crypto. Well, obviously, right? That's kind of interesting. We now know how that's going to happen, right? But does that mean it's all bad just because it ends up being used for bad down the road? No. I think we need to be artful, and we need to educate and equip our children in these technologies so they're not left behind. Literally, already 50 to 60% of the current jobs are not going to exist in the future, right? So we need to equip our children in technology and to be disciplined with it.
And to know how to use it. Yes, being disciplined in it is knowing how to use it. I think that the biggest, as far as talking about older teenagers and young adults launching into the world and potentially being entrepreneurs, having their own businesses, utilizing technology for business growth and expansion, it's one free way to do it.
Yeah.
Right? And there aren't very many free ways to build a business these days. And I know that as time goes on, it's going to become even more so how people are actually communicating in business. Even if they were to be employed by someone, they're going to be required to communicate through technology.
You're going to use an app.
Every single kind of job.
There's going to be an app, yeah.
Here's the deal. If you have one kid, you could easily hold tight the line of, oh no, we're not going to use technology. Our kids are not going to have smartphones, all of these kinds of things. And I get it, like brains and screens. And
that's a big deal.
That's a big deal. There's a whole dopamine rush. You can listen to our podcast episode that we did with Screen Strong, which was a phenomenal podcast episode. We did that last summer. And there's a lot of information out there, which is why we protect our younger kids from that kind of stuff, right? Why we don't have games on our phones that our kids are playing with while we're out at restaurants. No, we talk to our kids, right? And so you as parents have to figure that out as a couple. But here's the deal. The reality is, we have 9 kids. The chances of all of them not having jobs that are going to require using technology some way, that's impossible. Absolutely impossible.
So I want them to be disciplined with it.
They have to be disciplined
while they're in our homes.
Or it's going to be potentially a temptation to fall into other addictions, other sins, other not having the ability to be self-disciplined.
Here's another take on it too. I want them to see me being disciplined. And honestly, sometimes I'm not, right? Sometimes I do look at my phone too much, and that's something that I'm fixing. So it's important that, I'm working. I could easily make that argument because, we're doing all kinds of things online, right? But at the same time, I need to keep family time, and model what it looks like to be a dad disciplined with technology. And I do a pretty good job, but sometimes not perfect. And I think that we have to think about that. We have to model it. We have to equip. We have to teach them. And
we use ourselves as an example by saying, hey, I'm sorry, or hey, this is going to change, or I don't know if you've noticed this and it shouldn't be that way.
Talk about it.
And you just talk about it and you share with them what your boundaries are, what your disciplines are. And I think that that's really powerful. I mean, a lot of times it's interesting. One of the things that we have always gotten from people is, how do you get so many things done? How do you do all the things you're doing, right? And I would say that it's largely a blessing that we grew up in a generation that didn't have that technology.
Yeah,
and so
true.
I actually think that that's really powerful for kids to grow up kind of, honestly, kind of like how our childhood was without technology in that regard, in regards to technology.
When they're younger.
When they're younger. But they also have to be taught how to navigate it, how to utilize it without it taking over. Otherwise, there's going to be potential problems in their marriage in the future. And so it is something that your kids have to learn. Otherwise, they're learning it on their own.
Here's what happens in humanity. Okay, I've seen this so many times, so many places, leadership, all kinds of places, is when you have something that can be used for good and be used for bad, if the leader can't be self-disciplined with it themselves, then they will excommunicate the thing completely because it's risky.
They'll delete it.
They'll not use it at all because that's a temptation for them. And maybe that's the right thing. But oftentimes, the better answer actually is to grow in self-discipline and use the good parts of something in a self-disciplined way, because your kids eventually are going to have that battle. And if they aren't equipped by you at some point, then they're having that battle by themselves.
Well, and I mean, that's really the reality, is that then they're going to feel like they can't come to you either. We were talking about this before, about, if you were to raise your kids, let's just use smartphones as an example. If you use phones and you teach your kids they're evil, and we're never going to have them, and right? Then those kids, they grow up and maybe they're required to even have them for certain jobs, right? And they feel called to that profession. Whereas you did not feel called to that profession because you were not. You were called to something else. They may potentially feel completely judged and hide what they're doing because they feel that they were raised a certain way of like, no, you can never have a smartphone, or you can never have this, right? Instead, you want to have like a good enough relationship where you're teaching them, you have a balanced perspective on it, where you're like, yeah, it's not good for me, so I'm gonna have this boundary. But we do have one, and it's good for use in this kind of a way, right? Like that would be kind of a more balanced perspective. And just like how I'm aware of myself, and I was using movies as an example, and how I can't watch certain things that Isaac can watch, and recognizing like, no, I have a boundary for myself based upon how I'm wired. God made me this way. I know that would like ruin my mind in the night or whatever. Or I would worry, and I would be full of anxiety potentially. The same is true in regards to like the devices and the technology that we use. And if we're raising our kids, we don't want them to feel like they're going to be excommunicated if they have a smartphone when they're older, or, you know what I mean? Like
accidental
from the family.
communication.
It's like an accidental thing that can be a message that is sent to your kids on accident based upon your approach to it. And so really,
okay, here's
it's
where
just
we're going, guys. In the future, whether you like it or not, your sunglasses are going to replace the smartphone. Okay?
Unless you have old-fashioned sunglasses.
And then the battle will be that, right? Well, I mean,
yeah.
But cars are going to work with your sunglasses, right? And the maps will appear through the sunglasses versus in the car, because now you can keep your eyes on the road and don't have to look over here. I'm just telling you, like, change is on the horizon. I'm just making that up, but it's probably going to be true. but things are on the horizon, okay, that of change. And
like you're thinking, even just you're a visionary, so you think like 100 years down the road easily for a lot of things. Well,
that's just 5 or 10 years.
I know, but you can even think like that far, where you're like, okay, am I equipping my kids today, not just for their future, but to be able to equip our grandkids and our great grandkids for the future? And even though we don't necessarily know and see what's going to be happening in 100 years, you know there's going to be growth. Mm-hmm. You know that there's going to be more technology. You know that jobs are going to be different. And so because of that, you parent today and teach your kids, you have to be flexible. You can't be rigid. You can't just have the perspective of eliminate versus learning how to manage, which is what I hear you saying, right?
That's the point.
It's really like the wrestle of, am I just going to control everything and eliminate, delete, control, thinking you have control, but in reality, you don't actually have control. And versus having this adaptability and this willingness to learn how to manage and be self-disciplined and to punish yourself and have delayed gratification and like all of those elements, and teaching your kids the importance of learning that.
Absolutely. And some of you are like, Isaac, you're wrong. We're not even going to be driving cars. They're going to be driving themselves. You're right. But here's the thing. I hope I can still drive my car. But I need to adapt.
No, you do need to be able to adapt.
At some point, they'll be driving for us.
So 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13 says, therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So we're called to be sober-minded, not haughty, not arrogant, not thinking, oh yeah, this is the way, like this is the only way on anything. Like I even see this a little bit with the homesteading movement, right? Where it's like, this is the way, this is the only way. Like, and you can start to feel inadequate, like you're not doing enough. And I would say be sober-minded and prepare your minds for action. When I look at that, prepare your minds for action, it's like, okay, are you reading the word of God? Because he's the one that's going to have the ultimate wisdom. When you're in a precarious situation and you need discernment and you need wisdom, it's not man's words that are going to get you through. It's God's words. So prepare your minds for action. Are you reading the Bible? Are your minds actually ready for action to make discerning decisions, to be able to acknowledge when information overload is actually helpful or hurtful to you?
I actually think homesteading is going to subside because comfort is going to increase during the Trump years of safety and these kinds of things. So homesteading will subside for the next 4 years a little bit.
People will stop thinking that they need to be living
But that's okay. But the third point is self-discipline. We've been talking about this a lot. But in terms of technology, it's important because it can be information overload. We at the fingertips, we can get all access to everything, and it's getting fed to us. The algorithms are trained by what we view, what we click, what we slow scroll on, and we're getting more and more of that, and we're getting saturated with, like, let's say you're into homesteading, all the homesteading stuff, but then all the prep stuff and why you should be prepared and all these things, and it can get overwhelming. Or maybe your thing's food or diet or exercise, and so you're getting fed all of those perspectives, and you have all kinds of really what we would think of as weird knowledge in the old days, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but everybody has a bunch of weird knowledge now, which may be accurate and good knowledge and helpful, but how much of that is good for us, right? At some point, it can be overwhelming. And so you have to know where your boundaries are with that and have self-discipline with technology and what you're looking at.
I think that some of the overwhelm, when I think about from the mom's perspective, like if you're getting a lot of information overload, because we're in the age of information and technology is everywhere and there's just so much information at your fingertips, you could, if you're a mom living in an apartment or you're a young parent living in your home, in a first home, and you're in a neighborhood and you're just overwhelmed having little kids and you're like, I just need to get my garbage out on Tuesday. And mowing my yard, like that's my max right there. Cause I got baby in the front pack, baby in the backpack, or toddler in the backpack, kid in the stroller. I'm trying to do this during nap time. Everybody's napping. You got your monitor and you're like, quick, mow the lawn, you know? And you're like, I remember being in that season before we had older kids and wanting to do all the things, having the garden boxes in the backyard when we had Kelsey and her learning how to garden with me for the first times. And I remember thinking back to that season, and we were gradually, slowly building an infrastructure so that we could have fresh vegetables and so we could have fresh fruit. And the heart behind it and the motivation was good. It was good. But it was constantly never like fully enough. Like I would accomplish something, and it was like, instead of celebrating that, I would think about the next thing, the next project. Oh, hanging baskets. Oh, the next thing. Oh, sprinkler system. Oh, the next thing. And I've had to really, this year, one of my words, as you know, is marvel or be still. And one of the convictions as I've been trying to practice this has been realizing I need to get better at celebrating and having that joy when we do accomplish something and taking time to celebrate it. Because otherwise you can just be on the feeling the rush or the adrenaline of that excitement of the next new thing constantly. And that's not actually enjoying life. And so not allowing your overwhelm or your even to-do list or all the things that your dreams that you have to steal that joy. Like, we need to take time to celebrate. And so that's been something that for me, myself, has been kind of helping me. Like, just a couple days ago, the boys and I were outside and they helped me with pruning the blackberries and raspberries. And I took a moment to celebrate. We're going to have blackberries and raspberries at the least, you guys. We got that done. Good job. Good job, team. And then it was like, okay, you got that done. We celebrated. And I was like, I can do the herb garden. Let's get that done. Then we're going to have herbs too, for sure. Cause those are all coming back. And like, I want it to be healthy. Got that done in 15 minutes. Whoa. And then it was like, celebrate, And I think that, if we just look at the big picture and all we have to do, that can be overwhelming. But if we take one thing at a time and we conquer it, and we take time to really reflect and enjoy the process of what we're doing and celebrate, that changes. It's a different kind of focus.
Look at your week that way. I do. Like, there's lots of things I have to do during the week, but what is the one thing I'm going to get completely done this week? Like, it's going to be, or at least a big step is done,
Yeah. And I think that that's the big thing, is that when, like, if I was to look at our homestead, I could easily go, oh, I'm overwhelmed. And I did this last week, even confess this to the ladies at church. Like, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. My feet have been bothering me. I have all these things on my plate, and I'm looking at the pasture and I'm looking at the garden and everything that we normally do. And the thought of that, I'm like, where is the time going to come? And it could easily, if I look at all of it, it might seem impossible, right? But instead, what self-discipline does is it categorizes, it cuts things up, it prioritizes, like you're more thoughtful. Focused. You get focused on certain things. And I remember even feeling this way last year, and I just started doing one thing at a time. And I just focused on that one thing and didn't allow the thoughts of the other things to come in and overwhelm me. I didn't think about the big picture anymore. It was, nope, I got to focus on this next thing. We're going to get this done. And I got it done. And then I was able to focus on the next thing. And then by the midsummer, I look at it and I'm like, we have this big thing going, right? But it took self-discipline to not be getting overloaded with all of the information about everything, and to just focus on the things that I was good at and I felt like I was called to do more than anything. And I think, Matthew chapter 19, verse 26 says, but Jesus looked at them and said, with man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. And I bring that up because with man and man's words, all the things that man puts on our plates, it's impossible. It's impossible to be protecting your garden and everything from, like, even the stuff falling from the sky. And the neighbor spraying and the different thing, like, it's impossible, right? With man, it's impossible. But with God, it is possible to do your best. And honestly, like, that's truly, when you have an eternal perspective, you just give your best and you give God the rest. And that's how overwhelm doesn't creep in. It's how you take your thoughts captive when you're truly giving God the rest, and you go, what, other people can judge me, but hey, me and God, we're good.
All right. Unprecedented times tip is that you absolutely cannot do it all. And to pursue doing it all is overwhelming and stressful. It's going to be hard to celebrate because you're going to be spread so thin. It's going to be hard to enjoy it. But we do need to do certain things, and we do want to do things well. See, it's not that we don't want to pursue excellence. It's just that we don't want to pursue excellence in the things that don't matter too much and in too many things at once, to where the most important things then are suffering, which is relationships with your kids, which is time with your family, which is date nights with your wife, with pursuing God, which is, relationships outside the family and these kinds of things. So just think about that. In these times we're living in. By the way, I love these times. They're fascinating times, I always say. And this is the greatest time to be alive. Absolute greatest time to be alive is right now, because these are the times that God ordained you to be alive, and your children, and in your family, and embrace that. There's no anxiety about that. These are great times to be alive because God is sovereign. God is in control. Does give us a lot of responsibility, and we need to take that responsibility and equip and train his children. And the more we are taking solid steps forward with a really good biblical plan, and your marriage is aligned, there's nothing, and we're trusting God, there's nothing to fear in this world. Bad things will happen, but if you're doing what you can, and you're training and discipling your children, that's the most important thing. And I would say, by the way, what is coming in between you discipling your children? Because if there's anything that you're doing and you're not doing that, then we're missing something that's the most important.
Well, I would even say having a different perspective for how you do life, to where everything that you do in life is an opportunity to disciple your kids, right?
Working on the homestead.
Kind of like when we talk about homeschooling and we're like, well, it's a way of life. Like everything is education, right? It's the same thing with discipleship. Like we're always discipling our kids, and we're discipling them in work ethic. We're discipling them in faithfulness. We're discipling them in stewarding. It's a constant, nope, now we're going to take care of these things. Nope, we're not going to get more out. We're going to take care of what we have. Like there's a constant opportunity all the time for us to be training our children in righteousness. It's in the ways that God has laid out in his word. You talked about trusting the Lord, and we're just going to wrap up with Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5-8, which says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. If you're feeling overwhelmed, just remember that God's ways are refreshment. That's not overwhelm. Healing, that's not overwhelm. Healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones is what you will receive from the Lord when you are fearing him and you're not trying to do things in your own eyes. You're not trying to do things in your own knowledge. You're like, yes, you may have all this information, but if you're just focused on man's words and you're not taking that to God and surrendering it to him, you're going to be overwhelmed in your head, and you're going to need healing because you're not going to be feeling good. You'll make yourself sick. It'll affect your marriage to where there's just anxiety or just tension because you're constantly feeling this need to do things because it's never enough. And I would just say, surrender to the Lord. Trust him. Let him walk with you. Let him lead you. Let him discipline you. You discipline yourself in choosing to say no to some things so that you can say yes to the better things.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
See you next time.